for all of us. It's about predicting where the consumer is going and getting half of it right.
One of the things we want to do is create ads that don't suck.
Embracing change creates great possibility.
I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today.
Today on the show, I've got Jessica Padula. She's the Vice President of Marketing and Interim Vice President of Sustainability at Nespresso USA. Jessica joined Nespresso USA in 2016 as Manager of Social Media. When she joined, she brought a unique combination of experience from luxury, CPG, and food and beverage experience, having worked on brands such as Swarovski, Horizon, Organic, Pantene, CoverGirl, and Downy. In 2018, Jessica was promoted to the role of Director of Brand Communications. And in 2023, she was promoted to Vice President of Marketing at Nespresso USA. On the show today, we talk about her path, how she became VP of Marketing at Nespresso, what she thinks about leadership as a relatively new marketing leader. We talk about the next generation and new generations and how that contributes to their growing customer base and obviously how that influences their product innovation and marketing strategy. We talk about their efforts with respect to communities, including the Ali Fournet Center that they've been working with to support homeless LGBTQ. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Jessica Padula. Well, Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Excited to have this chat with you, Alan.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. I mean, I know we're going to talk about business and coffee and all things that you're doing to drive the company. But I have to say, I have a man crush, and I am so excited that I am now 1 degree from George Clooney.
Yeah, one step closer to the epitome of it all, right?
Yes. He is like, my wife kids me all the time. She's like, I think you like George more than I do. And I was like, yeah, you're probably right.
I'm not surprised to hear that. He is just the epitome of cool and certainly lives up to expectation. I've been lucky enough to meet him in person a few times, and he's just as wonderful as you think he is. So that's good news.
Yeah. I was literally watching TV last night and saw your commercial, The Bet, where he's at a swanky event. They're trying to guess what coffee drink they're going to get, or the guest is going to get. And he loses the bet and then has to ride this little tiny moped home instead of his swanky, like I would look like a Jaguar or something, like an old Jaguar.
It was a vintage Jaguar. Oh my God, it was a beautiful car. I was lucky enough to be on that shoot. And I have a picture of myself with that car. So I'll send it to you because my dad was like you, like, I gotta get in the car.
Yeah.
But yeah, he thrives in those moments of humor where he really got to act up. And I think we did that scene with him on the scooter, 10 times just because he was having fun with it, all the facial expressions. And that's where he really nails it, right? It's entertainment more than it is an advertisement in some ways. So that's fun. We like doing that with him.
I love it. Well, let's talk about you. Where did you get your career start? And you're now the VP of Marketing at Nespresso. So where did you get your start and kind of what were the stops along the way?
Yeah, it's been a journey. When I graduated college, I went to Boston University, go Terriers. When I graduated, I knew I wanted to get into brand marketing. I always just felt like there was a spark there, but it's really hard to get an entry-level role in a brand marketing role. And so I went into advertising, which to be honest, I'm so glad I did. I spent about 5 years at Gray, New York, through their creative renaissance in many ways. And it was great training. It was great to see that side of it. Advertising can be super fun, super grueling, but I still had that interest in moving brand side. So while I was at the agency, it was also, not to date myself, but the days of trying to sell clients on digital and social and trying to be an agency from the Mad Men era, but that was modern and rethinking things. So I started working on, at the time I was called a digital account manager, which is hilarious now because we're all digital now.
Right.
So again, that dates me a little bit. But when I decided it was time to get out of the advertising world and move brand side, I knew that the way I could worm myself in was really by specializing in something that brand managers typically weren't paying attention to yet. And that was social media. And so I really got my foray moving over to the client side through that specialization. Moved into some food brands. I actually left New York for a little while and moved to Colorado. So what industry is out there? Well, organic food, and had some really interesting opportunities out there, but eventually came back to New York. and kind of moved into the luxury space. I worked at Swarovski, the crystal brand, and really focused on amplification of corporate initiatives. So events and sponsorships and things like that. Loved doing that. It was super swanky. I got to go to Fashion Week. I got to go to behind the scenes at Madonna's world tour, things like that, wherever crystals were being placed, right? But had to quickly realize that I missed kind of the CPG, like the churn of real business driving initiatives. I'm sure parts of Swarovski have that, but the division I was in was more focused on brand reputation. And so when the opportunity came to join Nespresso, I was still specializing in that social and digital landscape. But I've been here now over 7 years and have kind of evolved in that time, right? From a social and all the related fields, influencer and PR and events, into broader comms planning, broader brand management. And then, in January of this year, I took on the VP role, which is an amazing testament, I think, to Nespresso and their ability to see that, someone who had their sort of lowly start in social media can kind of work their way up.
Love it. I really enjoy your background. I mean, that from digital to social, now you've spent 7 years at Nespresso. One, that's kudos, because not many people stay at the same company anymore. I don't know what it is, but it seems like 2 to 4 years and people start to rotate. But congrats too, in January becoming the VP.
Thank you. Yeah.
How do you think about leadership as, a relatively new marketing leader?
Yeah. First of all, I love leading people, but I equally love doing the marketing work. And so a lot of my role now, kind of the further you go up the chain, the further you get distance from some of the day-to-day work and the things that like created your passion in the first place, right? So to me, I've thought a lot about this and I've done some career coaching over the years, and leadership to me, it really comes down to empathy. I think that's just an innate part of who I am as a person, but it comes through in how I personally feel like you can lead successfully. Empathy requires vulnerability. It requires you to say, I'm not the only one here who matters. I'm not the smartest one. I need you on the team, but I also have value to add. And can we kind of be human beings to work better together? And I think empathy is connected in many ways to psychological safety, which I know Google has done tons of research around about how safe you feel in your work environment actually makes you better as a worker and more fulfilled. And like, isn't that what we all want? I think the other interesting thing to your point, Alan, about being a new leader is let's be honest, there's always imposter syndrome. And empathy can kind of be at odds with imposter syndrome, right? Because you want to be empathetic, but you also need to kind of assert that you're here, you are here for a reason and you have value to add, but you want to be vulnerable and empathetic. So it's kind of this balance for me at all times of how much do I get in the weeds to do the work because I love it, but let people, give them the space to do the work that they need to get done, showing them that you trust them and care about them as human beings to do their best work, but also knowing that you do have a role to play. It's just this constant juggle, which I think you either thrive in or you feel overwhelmed by. And for me, I'm in the middle, probably.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It makes sense. I mean, in empathy, I was just with another leader yesterday, and they're in the process of making some really tough decisions about employees and things like that. And it's moments like that, I think the empathy and the leadership characteristics of who you are as both a person, but as a leader start to come through when you're in the moment of making that tough decision, whether it's about employees or whether it's about the direction of where you're going to take the company.
Yeah. Business is not always in line with what an individual wants or needs. And so, I think empathy allows you to approach that with thought and care and being intentional. But also understanding that for me, it's never just about the business. It can't possibly be. I might be motivated by achieving my sales goals and all of those things. But at the end of the day, it's the people that you connect with and who you meet that really matter, right? I don't know, I can get in a little woo-woo, the psychological stuff, but we're all human beings are wired to connect and want that community. So to me, that's where it has to start.
No, agree. Well, talking about Nespresso and as a consumer-oriented company, I have to imagine that new generations are going to be key to kind of growing the customer base and who you guys serve. How are you thinking about attracting and marketing to those new generations?
Well, first of all, the biggest thing we've noticed as it relates to coffee consumption and the consumer, as you look, what is their introduction to coffee and what's their coffee drinking preference? It's not at all the same anymore with Gen Z. And there's a couple of reasons behind that, I think. But as you think about attracting those younger consumers, for a while we were sort of putting Gen Z a little bit on the back burner and saying, you know what, they're not ready to be buying appliances really. They don't have their own homes. And this is kind of a higher price point product. So maybe they're not quite there yet. That was maybe a year or two ago. And fundamentally, it's shifted now. We look at them as starting to be graduating from college, maybe starting to get their first apartments. Maybe they're not even going to college, to be honest. And their coffee drinking consumption is totally different. It's all about iced. It is 100% defined by cold coffee, and it's largely out of home. That's the first experience they as individuals have with coffee, whether it's with friends or family, whatever. My first introduction to coffee was my parents making, Maxwell House and a big pot of drip coffee at home. Like the world of coffee is just completely different for them. And so we have had to say, what does that mean for everything through the funnel, from product development and innovation, the machines that they might want in their homes, the price points that we're considering. But the first thing is really the cold coffee. And we were chatting with our PR agency the other day, and you know what they said? I always thought, well, they're just a different generation. They like different things. They have different tastes. But it's funny to think what's driving the interest in cold coffee is it's often served in a clear to-go mug. And it's selfie worthy, right? It's Instagram worthy. They can take pictures of it. It looks way cooler than your black coffee at home on your counter. So I thought that was kind of an interesting insight. I think there's something to that. They may also just be more into flavors and things like that. But that kind of is a long-winded way of saying there's lots of facets of thinking about where they are in their lives, what would appeal to them. And that's everything from product to how we market to them, to the types of experiences we're creating.
Yeah. When you mentioned Maxwell House, I mean, like I totally remember growing up, right, with a big vat of that stuff. And that was coffee. And then like, I don't know, I don't want to date myself, but I'm not young, but it was, at least in my 20s or 30s when Starbucks came on the scene, and then there was a whole new language. And I can't imagine I'm going to sound like a total boomer, but the kids these days,
Kids,
they grew up in that generation like that. I'm sure mom and dad were, running to their favorite coffee place and getting their drink. But so it's cool. I mean, it's cool that you guys have tapped into this group and that you recognize that ICE is really about where you're going. How does the insight around your customer base, like how is that driving your product innovation? And can you share, a little bit of like where you're going and what you've built off based on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, I'll mention the machine that we launched this year. And that was really born out of a lot of the insights that we're talking about. It's called the Virtual Pop machine. And it's got so many facets of it that are really poised to draw in that consumer. And I think we're ahead of it in some ways in that regard. It's a smaller footprint, our smallest ever. So it's actually, I think, about 30% smaller than our previous Virtuo machines, which means it can fit into city dwellers' apartments. It can fit maybe next to other coffee solutions on your countertop, which we know our consumers often consuming lots of different types of coffee. It's brightly colored. So we've never done, a mango yellow machine before. But that, again, Gen Z is all about this like 90s nostalgia, bright colors, neon. And so the color palette is meant to address them. We also brought it down at our lowest price point because it's smaller and because of the way we created it, that it's meant to draw those people in, that younger consumer in. So that was obviously many years in the making, but we were able to launch it this year. And that, I think, fundamentally sets us on a different foot with Gen Z in all the work that we've been doing and how we've tested it and even how we've seen the results in market. I think what you'll see is more focus on how do we deliver the best possible coffee experiences now that we kind of have the machine, right? That's our workhorse. We get in the door with acquisition, and then we have to make sure that the coffee experiences pay that off. One of the fun things about the machine is it actually has a double tap mode that we're starting to educate people on that actually brews the coffee a little bit more concentrated than the way it would normally. Clicked once. And that's actually meant to work over ice or with milk, where you're going to potentially, quote unquote, water the coffee down. Right. This mode is like, again, another piece of innovation that's just in the hardware or software of the machine that allows you to do something totally new with the coffees you already love. So that's on the product side. And then we can talk more about the events and sort of in real life world, because I'm sure everybody's talking about it, but in a post-COVID world, I think Gen Z in particular, and even to go back to our conversation around community and connection as human beings, they want to get back in person. They don't just want to do it just to go to the coffee shop and buy a beverage, right? They want to go and experience something new and different and have this richness added to their lives through brands and partnerships and things like that. So we've tapped into that too. We did an amazing pop-up over the summer that I can tell you more about, where we took over the Santa Monica Ferris wheel, the iconic Ferris wheel on the beach. And we took the gondolas and we turned them into little iced coffee cafes. And that's, again, a perfect expression of the machine coming together with the coffee, coming together with this experience that's all really meant to address who Gen Z is, what they want, and how Nespresso can uniquely offer them something versus, just being overly promotional or overly product focused.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, you talked about like this notion of communities and seeking connection. Like, how do communities play a role in your efforts, if you will?
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about the human element of it, right? But from a category standpoint, you think about coffee, and there are some key emotional territories that we know coffee plays in people's lives. And it's probably one of the reasons why I've stayed at Nespresso so long, is because I really feel like you get to connect instead of just sell things at Nespresso. And that's because fundamentally, coffee plays this really important role, I think, in people's lives generally, but certainly with our target, it's much more than just that functional wake you up, get going in the morning. There's always some of that, let's be honest. But coffee actually does serve as this connection point between people. That's why coffee shops, you mentioned Starbucks earlier, that's why they exist. They're this like third meeting place for this third part of our lives that, as Starbucks says, and it's because coffee allows that connection and that community. And so that's one piece of the puzzle we have to think about. Even though we're an at-home solution, how can the brand tap into that emotional territory of connection? If you may actually be drinking your Nespresso primarily in-home by yourself, what can the brand kind of do to surround that singular experience with community? And that's where some of our boutiques and some of our social impact work come into play. We have boutiques in about 37 different cities in the US, and they serve as these little community hubs. The people who go there, a lot of the shoppers come back regularly, and they're talking to an Nespresso employee every single week or every other week, and we know their names. And I think there's that really unique one-to-one in-person connection, especially with a D2C brand, that drives that connection and that community. But then as you think about how do you scale that up, right? That's on a very one-to-one basis. The other piece is, again, going back to Gen Z, we know that their definition of sustainability has fundamentally changed to include this idea of social justice and social impact. And that's all about me and my community and who's a part of my community and how inclusive are we. And so we've leaned into that space as well, both because it's part of what's innately true about coffee and the coffee category, as I mentioned, but also because we know our consumers kind of expect this out of brands that they choose to bring into their lives. And we've done a lot of work around social impact in our local communities. An example I'll give you is our headquarters are in New York for the US. And we started a partnership several years ago with the Ali Fournet Center. And if you're not familiar, they are the nation's largest homeless youth shelter for LGBTQ youth who, have been kicked out of their family homes or not accepted. And it's an amazing center, and it's an amazing cause that our employees actually told us they really wanted to engage with. And so how do you bring that back to coffee, right? It kind of feels a little further afield. But if you think about it, we connected it through an artist who took that story about the Ali Fournet Center, connected it through art on a coffee mug that we then sold as a way to not just raise awareness for the charity, but actually give money back and make sure there's this connection between the thing I'm drinking every day is part of something bigger than just me or my individual moment. And so there's a lot of pieces of community in the way we think about that, but it's everything from like how we show up in a boutique to these bigger initiatives with the Ali Fournet Center and other charities.
I love that example too, and in particular because, like, as you think about it, I mean, not only you're raising money for the cause and highlighting an interesting artist as well in the mix, but it's also a daily reminder as you use the mug, right?
Exactly.
It's a reinforcement of the mission of the organization and the connection to what you love, which is coffee.
Exactly. If you can make that moment that much more of like a ritual and a reminder of the choices that you make and the care that goes into, the thing I didn't mention is that all of that local impact work is really referencing a global brand purpose. And a lot of the work we do on the farms with farmers to make sure we protect the future of quality coffee, to ensure it's, in your cup at the end of the day, but also to be fair to those artisans, right? Those artists that are crafting our coffee for us, we want to be caring and thoughtful and supportive of them the same way we want to be in our local communities. And so there's this through line to, okay, this brand, I see that it matters for me and my community, and I can understand or maybe extrapolate a little bit that that's just, like you were saying, a core part of the vision and the role that the brand feels like it can play in the world at large.
Yeah. Well, I am very impressed with Nespresso business. It's a great product. A friend of mine, older friend of mine, used to get completely jacked up on espresso shots from his Nespresso machine.
Yeah, it can be a slippery slope.
It can be. I just remember him, like, we would be doing a Zoom call many years ago, and he'd be like, hold on. And I'd be like, you're going to go get an espresso, aren't you? Yes. Like, this is your second one during our 1 hour call. Come on, man. Like,
right.
Anyway.
Well, it's good. It only takes about, a minute and a half to brew one.
Exactly. He was always back pretty quick.
Yeah, it never really interrupts you. It's funny you say that because we had a couple of years with COVID break, but all of our conference rooms in our office obviously have machines. And it is a natural part of a meeting for someone to do exactly what you just described. But when I first started at Nespresso, I remember my boss at the time saying, yeah, my doctor told me I probably should scale back because you go from meeting, you have 7 meetings in a day and you have one. It's just part of the culture. You have one every single meeting. All of a sudden you're at like 10 coffees in a day. It's really dangerous. So I try to limit myself to 2 or 3. That's my goal.
I love it. Well, one of the things I love to do on the show is to get to know you a little bit better. We know you are now my 1 degree connection to George Clooney.
I got you, Alan.
But I love asking this question of everyone that comes on. Has there been an experience of your past that defines or makes up who you are today?
Oh, well, so many. But one that is maybe a little silly, but I think it's fun to share is when I was about 10 or 11 years old, my family relocated from where I was born in Huntsville, Alabama, if you can believe it, to outside of DC. And my dad worked for NASA. People always ask me, like, what's that connection? It's a really random one. But that was the reason for the move. And it's funny now to think back, but before we moved, I was paralyzingly shy. Like the stories my parents and even my extended family will tell is I wouldn't even go up to order my own fast food, at McDonald's.
Right.
I didn't like answering the telephone. I mean, at 10, but like I really was very, very shy. And after moving, I think that there's always this conundrum when you take kids and shake up their life like that. I'm sure my parents grappled with it, but it was one of the best things for me because I almost had to get out of my comfort zone. I had to meet new friends. I had to just open myself up to a bigger and different world. And to the point where then when I went to college, I actually chose a college, I mentioned BU before, where group presentations and live presenting in front of a 30 or 50 person room was a core part of the curriculum. I did that almost every week for 4 years. And I never would have been able to do that, I think, without the move in there. But B, I think it's really defined kind of who I am and what my special sauce is as a leader, to the point where I'll give a shout out. One of my very first ECDs when I was working at Gray, his name is Thomas Puckett. If you're listening, Thomas, thank you for this. One of my first presentations, I was maybe a year out of college. I had to do a presentation in front of a big room. He came up to me later and he was much more senior and very experienced. And he looked at me and he goes, how do you do that? Do you have tips? You're so good at presenting. And I think that was that first aha moment where you can reflect and say, oh, all of this has been leading me here. And this is something that, it started with that move, but then it's turned into this thing where I'm comfortable speaking in a way I never really envisioned.
Love that. I love that. You'll have to thank mom and dad for sure. After that.
Yeah. Like I said, I know they grappled with it. They probably felt bad moving, but they also, we lived in Huntsville, Alabama, and no shame on the South. I love the South. I was born there. But my parents are from New England. So I think when they were there raising 3 kids, they were like, oh, the world here, they got to be opened up to the world at large. And we did it.
Yeah, no, that's funny. That's funny. Well, what advice would you give your younger self if you're starting this journey all over again?
I'll give you one of my mantras, which is every yes is a no to something else. And I love this because it's about boundaries. It's about being intentional with the choices you make. I think it really, for me, sums up my ideal state of being in a way. I can't say I always achieve it, but I think it can apply to so many facets of life. It can be making decisions about, again, where to go to college, who to marry, when to have kids, if that's what you want. It can apply to work. It can apply to how you juggle. For me, balancing being a working mom and saying yes to opportunities that fall outside of the workday. And I think if you can remember that and feel the power in that statement, which is it's you at any level of the organization, you have the ability to, in some regards, meet expectations or not meet expectations, but choose your yes versus your no's. But you can't say yes to everything.
I really love that statement. Every yes is a no to something else. That's
Yep.
beautiful. Well, is there a topic you think marketers need to be learning more about? Or maybe it's something you're trying to learn more about yourself?
Ooh, yes. Data analytics and visualization. I think increasingly marketing is becoming so data driven because of the realities of the digital landscape. We used to not be able to measure anything really, right? When you ran TV, you maybe had your set-top box Nielsen data, but that was it. Now you can measure almost every piece of creative before it ever goes into market, know how it's going to perform, see how it performs in market. And I think the curriculums of marketing have not, in my experience, even adapted yet to how much of marketing is data driven. And I talk all the time to my head of data and insights about this. Like, you guys know how to not only analyze, I never will know how to analyze the data the way that they do,
Right.
but how do I translate the story, ask the right questions, and then turn it into a story that really validates and showcases the role that marketing can play within a business and an organization. And so we've been talking a lot about how we build that capability up internally, leverage the expertise within analysts the way that you need to, but also marketing people have to speak almost a new language that they weren't necessarily trained on. I heard recently that some of the deans of like the biggest MBA programs are actually having regular meetings and conversations, rethinking Six Sigma and like thinking like, what's the new version? Because that doesn't really work in the real world anymore. And so I think it's all connected to just how much the industry has changed and how fast the pace is.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's to your point. I think the way you described it, which is weaving the story that comes from the data and the insight that you're able to glean. It's a almost in some ways and in some organizations, it's a unicorn skill. Like it's not enough people have it, and so we're forced to kind of like sit through gobs and gobs of data, going, well, okay, well, what's this? So what? Like, what do I need to focus
bottom line on top, blot, as I used to be taught, right? But but if you're just so inundated with so much data from so many different sources, and I used to joke like, with that much data, you can kind of make it say whatever you want it to say. Maybe that's a stretch, but then how do you crystallize that story?
Yeah, it's not entirely a stretch. One of my stats professors
I'm glad you say that.
From graduate school would used to say, his favorite saying was, statistics is lying with numbers. And I was like, you're a stats professor. Like, aren't you like
really
undermining?
Appreciate that, actually.
Yes. But I mean, we got more, unpack that. And it's like, you have to make sure you're accurately portraying the data. Otherwise, you could be susceptible to lying.
100%. And that's why we actually created like a neutral data and insights team within our organization. So I'm not a sales analyst. I'm not a marketing analyst. I'm just a business analyst. And it's for that exact reason, to have faithfulness in the data and what it's telling you.
I love it. Well,
that's funny.
Well, are there any trends or subcultures that you follow or you think other people should take notice of?
Oh, I'm trying to get into, maybe not personally, but gaming, which is such a funny one because it's kind of like this subculture that personally I have stereotypes about. I'm sure lots of people do. And it's the face of gaming is not, I think, what we once thought it was. It's just developed. The people who tell me they're gamers, every time I'm like, oh, really? Wow, I never expected that. And so we're trying as Nespresso in general, but myself in particular, to kind of break some of that down and understand, what is this subculture? Is there something here you can imagine from a coffee standpoint? They gamers over-index on caffeine or energy drinks. And so that's not normally a place that I would think we would go play because, again, certain stereotypes and what it once was. But it's such a growing space that we're trying to figure out how we might authentically show up there as a brand. So that's an interesting one.
Yeah. Well, I've got kind of a funny story. I was with my daughter. This was probably like 4 years ago. She was young, like 12, 13 at that time, maybe. We were in New York traveling, just vacationing. And we were walking down the street and there was just this couple in front of us and just looked like everyday couple. And she started twitching and like giggling, and I was like, "What is going on? Like, are you listening? Like, there's no earbuds in her ears or anything like that. Like, what is going on?" And she was like, "Dad, shh, shh." And I was like, "What?" And so finally, this couple like turns the corner, and we keep going straight. And I was like, "What was that all about?" She was like, "That's the girl gamer that I watch on YouTube all the time."
Oh.
And I was like, "Why didn't you say something? We could have introduced you. Like, we could have said something." And she's like, "No.
You got to play it cool.
Play it cool,
especially in New York.
And then the next day, because she had just gotten this gamer has swag. And so, like, for a birthday, we had gotten her a sweatshirt. So the next day, of course, she's wearing the sweatshirt, hoping to run into the gamer.
Yeah, again. Maybe we'll turn the right corner in New York again.
Yeah, exactly.
See, yeah, that's so fascinating. Like, first of all, I mean, gaming to me was like the N64 console that you had to blow on to make it work.
Yeah.
It wasn't this like celebrity, almost influencer culture. So there's some space there that I think, again, it's easy to say, oh, that's not for us because gaming, what does that have to do with coffee? But actually, it could be fascinating. So we'll see. We'll see. Who knows?
All right. Well, last question for you. What do you think is the largest opportunity or threat facing marketers today?
Well, we touched on it a little bit before, but this connected to the data piece, this fragmentation of marketing, I personally feel like it's harder and harder to do our job as marketers because marketing now has so many channels, so many touch points, and it's almost impossible to be, expert of a few and master of none is sort of the sense right now. I attended a conference earlier in the year where they said they analyzed a thousands of marketers nationwide or something like that. And the NPS score, if you were to do that of marketing as a function, is like -2. And it just goes to show you that like if there's discontent within the discipline, is it the environment? Is it the proliferation of channels? And so you don't feel like you're able to master it. And I think that also just makes the storytelling harder as it relates to the data piece. We want marketing to be valuable to the organization, but then how do you show the value that it's adding when it's only becoming more and more complex to even understand the fragmentation of marketing? So I think there's a huge opportunity there if you can learn how to visualize the data, tell the story, and convince your CFO. But I think it's getting harder and harder in that way. Yeah.
Oh, I totally agree with you. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a joy.
My pleasure.
Let's stay in touch and hear what Nespresso does next.
Absolutely. There's more to come for sure. It's going to be a big year in 2024.
Hi, it's Alan again. Marketing Today was created and produced by me with post-production support from Sam Robertson. If you're new to Marketing Today, please feel free to write us a review on iTunes or your favorite listening platform. Don't forget to subscribe on marketingtodaypodcast.com. Tell your friends and colleagues about the show. I love hearing from listeners. You can contact me at marketingtodaypodcast.com. There you'll also find complete show notes and links to what was discussed in the episode today, and you can search our archives.